are going to be recording this session. All right, so welcome everybody to Columbia Climate School's accepted student event, specifically focusing on our climate school faculty panel. I think you're going to get a lot out of today's session, and I really want to encourage those of you joining us today. The focus should be on the academics. The focus should be questions relating to course content, what you can expect to get out of the courses, and any questions relating to housing or tuition, financial aid. Feel free to throw that to the admissions team. We'll make sure to navigate those questions with you. But I'd really love it if today's questions among the admitted students focused on kind of the course content, and we have some really phenomenal faculty with us. I do want to just briefly highlight some upcoming events in addition to today's panel. Next up to bat, there's going to be a financial aid info session. That's a virtual session specifically hosted by the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences financial aid team. I definitely strongly encourage you to register for that session. Our colleague Kate Jenkins will be leading that. Then on March 25th, if you haven't already registered, I encourage you to register for our admitted student virtual session, which is a long form presentation on the MA Climate and Society program, and we'll have multiple constituents presenting on it, from career placement, financial aid, of course. Both of our faculty co-directors will be engaging in this session, among many other staff members within student affairs. And then finally, if you are able to fly out, I definitely encourage Friday, March 29th is our admitted student day. We always have a fun day. We take a shuttle bus up to Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory. We'll tour some labs. We'll also see a research colloquium that takes place on us is Professor Sheila Foster. Sheila is a professor of law and public policy at Georgetown University and is appointed as visiting professor of climate for this academic year. Professor Foster is a leading scholar of environmental and climate justice. Her research spans a broad range of topics, including innovative resource governance regimes, land use policy, and the role of subnational governments and local leaders in addressing cross-border challenges such as climate change. Next up to bat is Professor Melissa Lott. Professor Lott is a professor of professional practice here at Columbia Climate School. And in addition to her role at the Climate School, she'll also continue to serve as a senior director of research at Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs, Center on Global Energy Policy. Melissa's work focuses on analyzing and modeling the technological, economic, and public health trade-offs resulting from changes in the energy system, with a particular focus on the transition to a net zero energy system. She's currently serving on the United Nations Council of Engineers for the Energy Transition, an independent advisory council to the UN Secretary General. Dr. Lott also teaches the climate mitigation course and has a phenomenal podcast, which I'm sure we're going to be talking about shortly. In addition to Dr. Lott, we also have Professor Jason Smearden. Professor Smearden is a professor of climate here with Columbia Climate School and co-senior director for education, as well as co-director of the undergraduate program in sustainable development. That's a phenomenal undergraduate major here. It's one of our top 10 largest within the college and the School of General Studies. He teaches courses on climate, environmental change, and sustainable development to undergraduate and graduate students. Professor Smearden also lectures widely in public and private settings on the subject of climate change and its social dimensions. Professor Smearden's research focuses on climate variability and change during the past several millennia and how past climate can help us understand future climate change. He publishes widely in the scientific literature on paleoclimate reconstruction techniques, the dynamics of past climate change and variability, and on assessing climate model simulations of the past and future using paleoclimatic information. And then finally, last but certainly not least, I always like to say the architect behind our disaster risk management specialization is Professor Jeff Schlegelmelch, who is the director of the National Center for Disaster Preparedness here at Columbia Climate School. In this role, he oversees the operations and strategic planning for the center. He also oversees projects related to the practice and policy of disaster preparedness. His areas of expertise include public health preparedness and community resilience, and the integration of private and public sector capabilities. Prior to this role at Columbia, he was the manager for the international and non-healthcare business sector for the Yale New Haven Health System Center for Emergency Preparedness and Disaster Response. So we will go ahead and deep dive into some questions just to kind of get the panel started, and then we're going to want to, everybody joining us today to also ask questions in the Q&A box. But if I can begin with Professor Lott, I'd love to hear a little bit about how your research and practice informs the courses you teach, and specifically the mitigation course. We'd love to hear that.
Thanks, Alfred. Great to sort of see everyone online. I can see the numbers creeping up, so it's great to see all here, and look forward to your questions. So a lot of the different things that I work on in my research and the papers I publish, and also in the practice part of Professor of Practice, where I'm out in the world. So for instance, today I'm in Punta Cana in the Dominican Republic, meeting with climate and energy ministers from all over the Americas as a part of the partnership there. And we're talking through what are practical pathways forward when we talk about accelerating decarbonization and mitigation, and how do we think about options for maximizing public health in that process. These conversations look really different when I work with countries around the world that have very low access to electricity, or they may have grid ties or some way to get electrons to flow around, but they don't have nearly enough affordable, reliable electricity that is also increasingly clean. And so it's about marrying up what the technical models. I'm an engineer by training, though I also have policy degrees, marrying up those technical things that tell us here's the optimized pathway forward. And then saying, well, what's the reality on the ground? What are the community preferences? What are the things that are important to the different stakeholders at the table, whether that's local leaders, local citizens, or big national or multinational government organizations? And what does that tell us in terms of how we can move forward? So in the class, the mitigation class in the fall, it happens around a number of different things that I'm involved in, and we bring it right into the classroom. So one of those is COP, the Conference of the Parties, the big annual climate meeting. A number of us on the faculty, Jeff, you were there last year, so was Lisa Dale on the faculty, and others. We bring our experiences there into the classroom. So this past year, we talked about phase out versus phase down of fossil fuels, what a loss and damage fund is and how it can be implemented, and how we finance solutions. Also during the semester, we have the World Economic Forum's annual Global Future Councils meeting. And I work with the World Economic Forum on something called the economics of equitable transition. So we bring in those discussions. What does it mean to be equitable? What does that mean in different contexts to different people in this whole stakeholder value chain? And then again, how do we implement it on the ground? So it's learning the basics and the foundations, but bringing in those real time, what's happening, what's in the news, what's being passed, what's going on around the world.
Excellent. Thank you, Melissa. And Professor Foster, could you share with us a little bit more kind of about your research and practice?
Sure. So wonderful to meet everyone, although I can't see you, and welcome. So I'm trained as a lawyer, but throughout my career, I've been working on issues of environmental justice and climate justice and law and policy related issues surrounding them, but also importantly, working at the community level. So there have kind of been three strands of my work that I bring into the classroom. I teach climate justice here at Columbia, as well as a course on climate law and policy. And this semester, I'm teaching a climate and energy justice practicum, in which students are working with different client organizations on energy transition issues as it intersects with climate. But from the very beginning of my academic career, I have worked with environmental justice groups in places like Camden, New Jersey, Chester, Pennsylvania, Harlem, to try to hold up their organizing, sometimes with legal strategies, literally going into court and bring lawsuits, civil rights lawsuits, environmental lawsuits. That is to say, looking at the requirements to allow a facility to operate and trying to find weaknesses in those in communities that are already overburdened with a lot of pollution. I've worked at the policy level with this, for instance, in New Jersey, the New Jersey Department of the Environment, the Department of Justice on their civil rights policy in the environmental field to try to shape the kinds of remedies that communities can get from administrative agencies and departments at every level. I've also worked with mayors around the world. I was helped someone named Dr. Ben Barber, who wrote a book called If Mayors Ruled the World. I helped him launch his brainchild, the Global Parliament of Mayors. And I was the chair of that advisory group for 3 years, working with African, European, and Latin American mayors on exactly this issue, right? The issue of what it is that local governments can do, subnational governments, when they may lack formal power, both at the international level, at the UN, or with the Conference of Parties. Mayors are often on the sidelines there, or even within their own national infrastructure. Turns out that cities can do a lot, and that's the other thing I've been doing. I've been on the New York City panel on climate change, which bears the international version of that. And I've been co-chairing the climate equity work for New York City, bringing or working together with climate scientists and social scientists to chart a path for New York City around equitable adaptation, often, again, working with the community groups here. So those are the ways that all of that experience comes into both my law and policy course and my climate justice course, which is not law specific, but very much focused on how we understand climate justice, both internationally and nationally. So I'll stop.
Thank you, Sheila. And Jason, share with us a little bit more about your research and the value of climate data. I know that's super important. You're muted, Jason. So sorry.
I gotta get used to Zoom. Apparently, I haven't done it. Welcome, everyone. It's great to have you all here. I just want to echo my colleagues' welcome. You guys are considering a really exciting, dynamic program. Columbia is an exciting place to be right now studying climate, and so you should all come. As far as my background goes, before I was a climate scientist, I was a physicist. That's what I did all of my degrees in. And so it's very much with that physical science and quantitative perspective that I come into this discussion. If you're familiar with the IPCC, I very much am in the working group 1 physical science space in terms of what I do. As Alfred mentioned, I look at paleoclimate. So I look at climate over the last several thousand years and think about how we can use that information to inform our climate models and where we think we're going in the future. So one of the areas that we've done a lot of work over the last decade is on the southwestern megadrought. Some of you may have seen those stories in the news. That is our research. We did a lot of work on that to assess the current drought that's unfolding in the Southwest and compare it to the historical records that we have from things like tree rings to show that we're very much in the middle of a mega drought, something we haven't had since the 16th century, and that over 40% of 40% of the severity of that drought is due to human activities. And so that's some of the work that we do. We also think about how we can use that information to inform how our climate models perform, which are the principal tool that we use to make projections into the future and constrain the information that we're getting from climate models to tell us how reliable the information is, what the climate models might be missing, and the things that they otherwise are projecting very robustly. So that's my research, and I bring that into the quantitative methods for climate applications course as a critical perspective on how we understand climate. So I'm going to step back from my research a little bit and just make the argument that climate fundamentally as a discipline revolves around statistics. We define climate as the long-term mean of past climate. When we talk about it changing over time, when we talk about extreme events, those are all relative to sort of statistical expectations and how things are operating outside of historical envelopes. And so to understand that and be able to be conversant in that space, you have to understand something about the quantitative methods that we use. If you're going to do that in this program, it's not to make you all into quantitative data scientists. Some of you may go that direction, but the important thing is that you all need to be able to understand something about the quantitative methods that go into describing climate and how it's changing, and be able to converse within communities that are going to use quantitative language and assessment to understand what people are saying and translating that information into useful action or otherwise. So we see this as an important part of our program, as a quantitative foundation that you get coming through our program, as an important area to really understand climate as a discipline and to be able to characterize what we think is coming relative to the past. So that's what we try to infuse in the class, and I'm happy to have additional discussions about the other things that we do in that class as one of our core experiences.
Thank you, Jason. And finally,
and congratulations, by the way, as well for acceptance into the program. Hope to see you all in class. And yeah, so my background is in disasters. It's actually I'm not from an academic background, so I started in local health, doing a lot of planning and pandemic planning, bioterrorism planning, and then moved into kind of a quasi-consulting environment based out of the New Haven health system. And so a lot of the work that I've been done has sort of been trying to take what does the scientific information tell us and how can we translate that into decisions we have to make today. I appreciate too, Jason, your framing of probability and the importance of statistics, because this really is a very probabilistic place that we're in. We're talking about dealing with different magnitudes of risk. We very rarely have precision in the answers that we need, but we have to make decisions, we have to make commitments. And so disasters, a lot of our work is at this intersection of many different fields of science, right? When a disaster occurs, there are human elements, there are sociological elements, there are legal frameworks, there are environmental, both the natural and the built environment, that all sort of intersect. And depending on sort of how that Jenga of factors is stacked up depends on sort of how the pieces fall. It might have gone too far with that analogy, but bear with me. But I think, so at the end of the day, how do we use this? How do you take incomplete information, ranges of probability, and actually use that for making decisions you have to make today, knowing that they might change down the road? And so we integrate that into the coursework a few different ways. One of them in the course that I teach in the fall, it's sort of a survey course of some of these different areas of inquiry and of science that intersect with disasters. And we go through that, but then the assignments are built around kind of the messiness of how do you do that. We have a group activity that's actually a negotiation of two different opposing groups within a community on an issue related to disaster resilience. And the midterm and the final, if you want to take notes now, you can get a head start on it, is actually an assignment I got in a consulting role on creating value propositions. And it's essentially taking a resilience initiative and essentially, what is the value proposition to three different groups within the community? How do we explain the value of what we're doing from the perspective of someone who may not have the same values as us or have the same motivation? A business group might have different motivation than a homeowner in terms of what is the value they're looking to get from that. So really trying to also bridge that gap between the ideal, what we can sort of in a classroom agree needs to be done, with how do we actually work with people in the community who we may not always see eye to eye with or have different values with. And so that's embedded in the assignments. And the other piece, I know we'll talk a little bit more later on too, is also the nature of the work at our center is very consultative. It's constantly working with governments, local, state, sometimes international, private sector, and others to be able to help craft these solutions, whether it's in trainings or documentation or checklist or things. And so we frequently work with students in graduate research assistantships or things like that within our center, but also we try to bring that in some of the other courses as well too into the classroom to actually try to bring some of the work we're working on to have some of these outputs directly influenced and directly connected with the real world. And where we don't have that, we work a lot with case studies based on, stripped from the headlines type of thing too, to also make this as contextual and as practical as possible, while still being fundamentally based in the evidence base to the extent that evidence base exists and is available.
Thanks, Jeff. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I know I got a chance to see the list as well. And I know some of you guys are joining us from as far as Chile and India. It's very exciting to see all of you guys here. For the next question, I'll go back to Melissa just for making sure time purposes. All the MA Climate and Society courses offer unique access to faculty and, of course, professional and academic opportunities. What kind of interactions do you have with students in the program, and what opportunities do students have to engage in research or practice with you or your colleagues? Melissa.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different opportunities, and I'll say some of them you can read about online, but a lot of them are the ones you find out about when you're physically on campus. So, for example, with the student researchers that Jeff mentioned, we, let's see, at the Center on Global Energy Policy last fall, I believe it was just under 80 students were working on projects across the center. And so they were mostly graduate students, a lot of different climate and society students, and it was everything from renewables to carbon tech to geopolitics to finance. I mean, different regions of the world, global programs, local community programs. There's just a tremendous number of opportunities. And so within that, there's that research opportunity. I also had a student who was in my mitigation class who I invited to come to COP with me, who was able to shadow through the COP process, be there on the ground for a number of the different conversations, and was able to join some off the record and Chatham House rules discussions with the UN. That individual was very helpful and took notes and was a good fly on the wall and was able to observe how decisions are made in that space in reality, how we cut through a lot of tough pieces to get to a practical pathway forward that balances a lot of different groups and a lot of different priorities, and how the UN system works. So that's another opportunity. In addition to that, we hold series of seminars and brown bags. And I just did a career event talking about what it is to be a woman working in energy and climate and kind of how my career is developed. And these are exclusive to our students. So we get asked every single time if even alumni can join. But because of demand, we keep those rooms small at about 30 students for each event. So you can actually have a discussion, and they're only to current students on campus and they fill up very quickly. So the list is long. The other thing I will say is there are a series of student-led conferences and events on campus, including the Energy Symposium we have every year, which is student-led, with students across campus and SIPA and SUMA. This year's leadership group on that I don't think has a climate student on it, but the climate students are involved in the execution of it, just not the core folks, only like four people there who volunteered. So there's just a lot of opportunities. The last thing I'll mention is that students get priority to come to the Columbia's Global Energy Summit every year, which this year will have Secretary Granholm from the US. I mean, you can go online. It's a very, very long, very distinguished list. And those folks love to talk to students. But the people who are allowed to be in the room, because it sells out every year, it goes to CUID holders first and students get to.
That's excellent. No, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And then Sheila, if I could transition to you, I know you have a course right now being taught with a built-in capstone that's quite dynamic. I'd love to hear a little bit.
Sure, yeah. So I've designed a practicum, which is lies at the intersection of obviously practice and also kind of theory, to work with organizations that are working on, let's say, the just transition, focused on disadvantaged communities and the ways in which they're burdened not just by climate impacts, disproportionate burden, but also by energy cost, and also don't have the resources to engage in the transition that we're undergoing, notwithstanding wonderful policies at the federal level, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is kind of a climate bill, and that's has a lot of money flowing down, and also the a brand new New York law. Practicum is designed to take a group of students, about 9 students, and have them work with organizations, and there are 3 organizations. One is a local organization that works here in New York, that's based in Westchester County, right outside of New York City, called the Energy Justice Law and Policy Center. And that organization is working on grid transition under the new New York state policies, which has a net zero goal for New York State, a transition, but also a 40% goal that 40% of those benefits should flow to disadvantaged communities. So that organization is working with the state on that plan, both reform at what's called the Public Utility Commission that helps set electricity rates, but also working on how we get solar and other kinds of renewables into disadvantaged communities. The second organization earth chamber of policies, one of which is there's going to be something called a cap and trade system here in New York State. And so the students will help design a cap and invest system. And that's a complicated system, but basically, to boil it down, if we cap the amount of emissions from carbon in the state coming from regulated sources, the idea is that dirtier facilities can buy allowances from those that may be cleaner, and the price of those allowances generates a lot of money. And what the state wants to do is take that money and invest it in disadvantaged communities. California has a similar program that's longstanding, so Earth Justice will help design the program here, and the students will help with that. And the third organization is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, their Office of Public Participation, which regulates a lot of the electricity transmission, including pipelines. And this has been a very contested area for Native American tribes and other communities that have pipelines and other energy infrastructure like Cancer Alley in Louisiana. So those tend to disproportionately impact lots of disadvantaged communities, communities of color, Native American tribes, et cetera. So there's this new office that is going to be working on the best ways to broaden the types of people that can participate in those decisions. And the idea is that we'll have a better sense of the impacts of a pipeline, for instance, or a transmission infrastructure in a particular place. So the students are going to work in groups of threes this semester with those client organizations on those projects, and then continue to work on them over the summer as a capstone. And so this is a pilot course that will give them a little bit of a longer runway to their capstone project, which they'll spend about 20 hours a week each over the summer working on. So anyway, very exciting. The students are very excited about the projects. And I also have guest speakers come in to talk about various aspects of the energy system in these policies, because it's extremely complicated, but also chock full of really interesting stuff. So anyway, I'll stop.
Oh, that's excellent, Sheila. Thank you for that. And Jason.
Yeah, well, there's lots of different learning modalities and spaces for various forms of contact within our program. So I want to talk about that first. And Sheila and Melissa have already touched on some of it, but practica courses, workshop courses, research opportunities, all kinds of opportunities for interfacing with many researchers here at Columbia, as well as organizations, NGOs, otherwise that exist within New York State and New York City. But I again want to step back and just give you a sense of what it's like to study climate and sustainability at Columbia University right now. It's this big humming nerve center that brings in, I mean, it really is hard to describe until you get here, but there is so much going on in this space, and Columbia really is an international leader on climate research. And you feel it here in terms of the research and the educational programs. If you come into the Climate and Society program, you're just one node in that massive neural network. First of all, at Columbia, but then placed in New York City, which has both all of the work that's being done specifically in New York City through the New York City government, international connections through things like the UN, lots of international NGOs. And then New York State is, as Sheila was alluding to, one of the leading states in the United States working on climate policy mitigation and adaptation strategies. And so you're really integrated in that larger network that creates a tremendous amount of energy and brings you really to the cutting edge of all these interdisciplinary interfaces that are going on. And that's infused into what we're doing at Columbia and building within the climate school, and of course the history that we have here in the Earth Institute and a lot of the other affiliated centers. And all of that is massive and exciting, and you have to be here to really get a sense of it. But what it should represent to you in this space of contact and practice-based experiences is opportunity. There's tremendous amounts of opportunity to get involved with different organizations, get involved with researchers. And it really is a sight to behold as our students come in and they find these opportunities that they really engage what's here and what's offered. And so I guess what I'm saying is you got to come to understand it on some level, but the size and the scale of what's happening here should represent opportunity for you, and the opportunity for finding maybe not something that we can describe collectively, but might be very unique to what you find out and what you're interested in, and put together as a student with all the different opportunities that you can work to connect here if you come.
And if I can just say one quick thing on that, and apologies, because I've got to go take the fancy dress I'm wearing today onto a stage here in a second, just across the site here. But to Jason's point, like, one of the things that I have heard my students comment so much on that I probably can't articulate clearly enough is the number of opportunities across kind of the hubs that are happening on campus. So we have students with engineering backgrounds, environmental science backgrounds, legal backgrounds, policy backgrounds. It's a long list. And you're not just working with, professors within the climate school. You're working with professors and on projects that span lots of different departments, because solving this challenge and adapting to the damage that's already happening, responding to disasters. I mean, Jeff, how many times have we worked across NCDP and the Center on Global Energy Policy? It's because that's where solutions are found. And that multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary approach is, quite frankly, the thing I didn't have and had to create in a haphazard way when I was coming through my education. And it's a huge part of why I'm at Columbia in the first place. Those opportunities just don't exist a lot of places, and they're a long, long list. So with that, back to you, Alfred. Sorry.
No, that was brilliant. Thank you, Melissa. Good luck today. Really, really appreciate your participation. And if I could now pivot over to actually Jeff, just perhaps we can just discuss opportunities within the National Center for Disaster Preparedness.
Sure, yeah, and I think, in any given year, we have a dozen or so students coming through, and they work on a range of projects. Our largest sort of cohort is some of our FEMA training programs that we develop and deliver nationally. I'm in Oregon right now. We had a pilot yesterday of our climate change and equity course we're developing and delivering on behalf of the Federal Emergency Management Agency. We have some new courses under development focused on tribal nations, working with the National Tribal Emergency Management Consortium. I might have gotten some of those words out of order, but I apologize for that, my nervousness. But in addition to that, we also have other things where we've had work in the past we've done with utilities on trying to research and develop a scorecard on valuing resilience beyond the reliability indices. So basically how many people the lights go off for, but actually looking at who the lights go off for, and what are the health ramifications, what are the social vulnerabilities that actually sort of increase value for certain types of investments in historically underserved communities. We have a project right now working with the Rockefeller Foundation on an index for concessional finance for a lot of countries that would benefit the most from adaptation funding aren't eligible for it. And so we're looking at sort of that cost benefit, and some community-based work, working with some communities on connecting some of the financial empowerment infrastructure with some of the emergency management infrastructure. So it cuts across a lot of different topics. And we work with a lot of students, both directly, where we'll bring on board and hire, as well as through the Climate School internship program and others. And I want to emphasize too, we make it a point to make it substantive work so that you have job experience from the job experience in taking this forward. And I'd also say too, quite frankly, I mean, we create a lot of opportunities for students. We benefit from students, from having really smart folks like yourself coming and help us figure this stuff out, to Melissa's point earlier. And being in a university and doing this kind of work without getting into the nuances of academic bureaucracies and things like that, it's a fundamental part of our business model. We can't do this work without you. And we commit to making sure that it's a substantive experience, something that you can carry forward. And I know in my own career development, having internships and things like that, where I could put the product in a folder and show that to a hiring manager and show what I did. And so I think we're always looking at that. And to Melissa, and these problems are so big and so complex, we need all the help we can get. And even as students, you're coming in with tremendous experience and expertise. That's
great, Jeff. And what I'd like to do now, just to make sure that there's enough time for our admitted students to ask questions. So feel free now to use the Q&A box and ask any questions that you might have for Jason, Jeff, or Sheila as it relates to their courses, the program, kind of the academic opportunities. We love questions. And then another thing, I always like to start the panel, but we were tight on time, and I wanted to make sure we gave enough for Melissa as well. But I always like to if you can highlight where you're joining us from, I think that's always fun. So Jeff's in Oregon, so Melissa was somewhere exciting as well. So if you guys can, in the question box, that would be great.
If I can, as folks put questions in, there's just one thing I wanted to note that I always like to note is that, when the first day of class in the fall for my class, I always ask folks, like, name background and why you chose to take this class, why you're interested in disaster risk management. And about 2/3 to 3/4 of people answer, I'm not sure, but my family was affected, or I was affected, or I'm seeing this more and more. That is a great answer. That is a great place to be. Now, the other 1/3 to 1/4 answers are great too. I'm not trying to take away from any of that. What I'm trying to say is that if there are areas that are of interest and you're diving in to explore them more to figure out sort of how this fits in with what you want to do, I think that is a great place to be. You don't have to walk into one of the specializations or one of the programs or one of the classes knowing exactly how it's all going to play out. I think having a general sense of interest and wanting to learn more about it is a good place to be. And I find that a lot of students along the way sort of identify. Some of them, say, I'm more interested in this area, and others really sort of awakens like, oh, now I see how this fits. Now I see how this comes together. And I think especially with some of the way that some of the curriculum has been shifted in the ordering, it really caters to that, and to being able to explore and take it something that feels interesting and better understand why it is and how that fits in.
Thanks, Jeff. And I'm seeing, we see Puerto Rico, we see Malaysia, we see Chile joining us today. Pablo, I'm so glad you're able to make it. Also, feel free to include the questions, though. We have our esteemed talent here. Now is the time. Please ask the questions. Phoebe, Brooklyn, locals, of course. So glad you can make it. But any questions relating to course, the course content or the climate core, Jason, has been instrumental and also knows intimately kind of the value of the climate core. If you guys have questions about that, that's a journey you will all share. I should emphasize that whether you're, so many of you are coming to this program and you might have a climate communications lens or a climate policy lens, or hey, perhaps some of you are more science driven and you're really deeply passionate about carbon management. All of you are going to be going through this course. So if you have any questions about that, please feel free to ask as well.
I also want to underscore the interdisciplinary nature of this program, which I think is phenomenal, right? I've been teaching prior to coming to Columbia many years at Georgetown, and I had a joint appointment between two schools, but I, all those years, never taught a class in which both students from both departments were in the same class. And coming to Columbia, I think that's, for me, and I think for the students, so enriching to have students from different backgrounds, but who are also studying policy or climate and society or sustainability in the same class, and to have faculty from so many different backgrounds. I mean, you really are getting a kind of all-round education, which is necessary to solve what is some would say a wicked problem, right? So anyway, I think it's really exciting about this program.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you, Sheila. Rosie from the UK asked, I think, an interesting question is, how are courses typically assessed? I have also heard that there's a lot of courses that use the flipped learning model. Could you explain this further? And the flipped model, Rosie, is dynamics. That's the specific course that Dr. Ming-Feng Ting and Professor Michaela Biasuti teach. But Jason, would you want to handle that one?
Sure, I'm happy to. So we have a system for course assessment. We have a committee on instruction that reviews courses, their success. We evaluate midterm course evaluations. So the students at the midterm break of each semester are surveyed on their feedback as far as the courses go. And of course, there's assessments at the end of each semester in terms of how the courses have played out and what students seem to find useful about them, things they would change, et cetera. We are, of course, given the state that we're in building out this program, doing lots of alumni surveys, folding in as much information as we can in terms of how things fit together and how effective they are. The other thing that I would say with regard to the flipped classroom question specifically is that, as I mentioned earlier, there's lots of different learning modalities that are infused into how we communicate the information that we're seeking to convey. So there are, traditional lecture and test formats, but we go well beyond that in terms of class projects, discussion sections, lab-based experiences. There's lots of different ways that we've infused into the curriculum to help students learn through different modalities. And also, in terms of specifically assessments of students within the courses, there's lots of different ways to succeed. So it's not an antiquated model of lecture and test. While some of that still exists, there's lots of different ways that we seek to help the students learn, as well as assess them within the courses. And then, going beyond that, we've already mentioned some of these things like the practicum experiences, the workshop experiences, independent study opportunities. So lots of different ways to engage the material that students are interested in, for those students to be evaluated and for the program as a whole to be evaluated and assessed as we move forward and thinking about how we're putting everything together.
That's great, Jason. I think another question that Anuka is asking, and it's really relevant for everybody here, is that, since this program is a 12-month program, what would you recommend for students to take kind of the most advantage of the opportunity within these 12 months? It's 3 semesters, it's a tight timeline. Kind of what recommendations would you have?
I was thinking of this question before it was even asked. I'll sort of say I sort of see, because I think it's an important point. The days go slow, the year goes fast, right? Sort of in any part of life, I guess. And so I think it's on the one hand. So I'm going to answer it sort of 2 different ways. One is, I think, and that's why I sort of gave the example earlier of having a rough idea of what you want to learn about, being able to come in sort of knowing what you want to pick and choose, what you want to grab, how you want to take advantage of that. You don't want to wait 6 months to then figure out, okay, well, maybe I'll take a course. So being proactive and sort of engaging with these opportunities, be a sponge, soak up these events, go to these events, go talk to professors. Really just about everybody we have at the school is very open to meeting with folks. I'm happy to meet with folks just to have, I can't tell you how many times I've just had coffee with students who are just interested in the field and just want to sort of pick my brain on different questions and things like that. So I think that definitely use that, especially use these early months for exploration. You have the shopping period for classes where you can register for classes, and in the add drop period, sort of pick and choose based on how it looks and sort of what you're doing. So take full advantage of that. The only thing I would caution is not trying to cram it all in the first semester. There's a small number of cases where I've seen some folks really, really ambitious that sort of take on a lot, and then the workload starts to kind of overwhelm. That being said, it's always a conversation of work. Well, okay, let's work together on this. Let's work, let's figure out how to make this work. So I think it's a very, very supportive environment for that. But I think to your point, there's a lot of opportunities. So it's important to sort of gauge those early on and explore those interests, because it's a great environment for doing that.
Jeff, and if I can just add quickly to that regarding courses. So warnings about overcommitting, notwithstanding. There's lots of opportunities. As much as we offer the core and we see that, this foundational knowledge that's important for any student going through the program, there's lots of opportunities for taking electives within the program. And they're not just electives within the climate school. So we've built out, some really compelling elective offerings specifically within the climate school. But if you want to take a course in public health, you want to take a course in the School of International and Public Affairs, you want to take an engineering course, those opportunities are there for the taking if you want to take courses outside of the climate school. And so there is a lot of flexibility in terms of how you augment the foundational knowledge that we think is important within the program. And because Columbia is a large research institution with lots of different schools and areas that overlap with climate interest, there's a lot of opportunities outside of specifically the climate school for you to take classes.
And I say don't discount the summer sessions too, because those are having more and more electives added. A lot of these 1.5 credit courses on special topics. We've got a couple more that we're adding, and so definitely it may there's opportunity to go above and beyond sort of the requirements. And so yeah, don't discount the summer, although it is tempting to go to the beach.
Yeah, and I don't mean to be the bang for your buck guy in the audience, but I do want to say you can take up to 20 credits per semester and you have the same flat tuition rate. And that's exactly what Jeff has referenced. Jeff had a course in the summer. I remember we were really encouraging students to take advantage of that. So if you are interested, I know it's one year, but there is quite a bit of opportunity to take quite a few courses. Again, with balance, that's always most paramount. So sorry.
Alfred, somehow you got muted.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. In terms of another question, I think that was pretty good is, and I think actually I'd love to pivot back to Sheila on this. Sorry, the practicum element of it, but Pablo is from Chile is asking about, my background is in stakeholder engagement and participative methodologies. Do we have a good amount of practical field activities with communities?
So my sense, and I've just been here a year, so maybe others can speak to this, is that, yes, we can help to create those opportunities, sometimes connected to a course. So the practicum, I think, at least for one of the client organizations, they do work in communities with communities around, for instance, Westchester County, which is right outside of New York. But also, for instance, I'm participating on something called a technical assistance setup that the Environmental Protection Agency established all over the country in different regions. And one community-based organization in Harlem called We Act is standing that up. And I say that because I'm bringing students to help those that technical assistance center, so to speak, reach out to other community-based organizations in the region and work with them. So I just got approved to hire a student to help out with that. So I think that's one. So those are a couple of opportunities. One is through a practicum, working with the client organization that's in community, and another are these other kinds of projects that many of us are working on, including grants in which we're partnering with community-based organizations. But I think the question is also asking about participatory research. There are folks, I think, in the public health as well as in the climate school that do research in communities using those methods. I'm not doing that right now, but perhaps others can speak to that.
Yeah, I would just add, we haven't really talked about the summer internship or capstone experience, but that's another place where this happens. So you are required to complete a class over the summer that you can satisfy with either an individual internship experience or work through a capstone class where you're organized with a group of students to work for an outside client on a project that has specific deliverables identified by the client. And we have some of those capstones work with folks like We Act. Sheila, they work with our Office of Sustainability at Columbia to work on sustainability projects within the university. Lots of different NGOs within the New York area, also within the New York City government. So we work to foster that experience in multiple ways, but the main way that it's done is that there's an organizational structure. The clients are identified. Students can decide among the clients that are available in the workshop offering about who they might work with. They're put into groups, and then there's a lot of help within the course. There are assigned instructors within the course to work with the groups as they interface with these outside clients to facilitate the experience. But that's very intentionally a practice-based experience where the students are working with outside clients or working in internships to apply the knowledge and skills that they gain over the course of the program in these specific settings.
Jason, that was a phenomenal point. And I'll just add, as soon as our capstone clients are released, I will make sure to share with this year, I'll make sure to share with all of our admitted students, just so you get a sense of who's up to bat next for capstone clients. That was great. Similar question. So really for students coming from like social science or creative backgrounds, which we have many, what can we do to prepare for the quantitative aspect of your courses ahead of the school start? And we do have the math boot camp, but Jason, do you have any suggestions?
Well, so there is the question about what they can do.
Yeah.
What support is available to help students? So the boot camp is the main way in which we help students get up to speed who are coming in from backgrounds that may have had limited quantitative experience. So that's the first step. But then I think the other important point to make is that we don't make any assumptions about people's background. This is an interdisciplinary program, and we recognize that we're teaching students with very different levels of preparation across the board. It's not just in quantitative space, but someone coming in with a quantitative background may be less familiar with some of the social science and humanities perspectives that are offered in other classes. And so the professors are all aware of this It's why in some ways we're education, which we see as fundamental to addressing the climate problem. So in my class, for instance, I'm first of all, don't make any assumptions about people's quantitative backgrounds. There are support networks, tutoring, and other additional support that's offered or that's arranged essentially through the program and is available to students. But the main thing is that the courses are set up so that we bring everybody along as much as possible. I'm not saying it's easy for everybody, but it is something that recognizes people are interfacing the material from very different backgrounds. And the other way that we approach that is, in my class, like I said, there are lots of different ways to succeed in the class and learn the material. So it's not just lecture and test-based experiences, but there are labs that augment the quantitative experience. So you actually learn how to program, but at a very fundamental level, we really sort of lead you along and give you the introduction that you need to be able to do computer programming, to do statistical problems. We have group projects, so the students work together in group. There's a lot of peer support that happens. So all of that, I think, really makes it possible. And in my experience, a lot of students are even surprised who come in and feel like they may not have the quantitative background that's necessary, but they actually have a lot of fun with it. And when it's applied in an area that they think is an important area like climate, they actually see the value. And it, I think, for a lot of students, makes them even more interested in it than they would have thought they would have been at the beginning.
That's great. Yeah, thank you, Jason. A lot of research questions, which is very interesting. And I just want to know, which is fantastic. One thing I do want to stress, though, we always like to say the MA Climate and Society program is a professional degree program. So we don't have while we don't have a thesis component to the degree, there are many research opportunities. Melissa highlighted them. Jeff has highlighted different opportunities for our students. So does anybody want to talk about, I don't know if this is helpful, but any other examples of research students can engage in?
Yeah, and I could talk a little bit. And Alfred, I think you bring up a really important point, which is that it's as an MA, it's a little more practice oriented, although I think the fundamentals of research, even if you're at that translational point, are really, really important, which I think this course gets across very well. But I do think, so some of the different projects that we have, again, a lot of the work that we have is translational. So I'd say the vast majority of what we do is where we're pulling information from literature reviews and things like that and applying them towards solution that we're trying to develop, whether that's a training solution, a planning process, a community engagement process, or something like that. So it's more that translational research. We do have some specific examples where we are bringing in, where we're doing maybe qualitative data analysis or something like that. I will say within NCDP, and really I can't speak on behalf of the other centers, but just knowing we have a lot of the centers are externally funded in terms of grants and contracts and things like that. And so what is available to bring students on to support depends on what's going on at the time. And the nature of that funding has a lot to do with it. Ours is much more like a consulting type organization. So it's very, very dynamic, short duration sometimes. Things come and go sort of, whereas others on maybe like multi-year NSF funding or something like that might have more predictability, more stability. And so I can't speak as much to that. But yeah, so, I think that they're, again, so I guess just to summarize on my end, the vast majority tends to be translational type of research, with some exceptions where we are doing some original data collection and analysis.
Thank you, Jeff, on that one. And then another question, Will asked, which I love it, Will, this is great. Do you have sample curriculum, what successful students have done, like courses in the samples, like elective 1, elective 2? What I can definitely do, and this is for everybody on the call, although faculty, please feel free to weigh in on this, but we do have current students that schedule one-on-one appointments. And Will, if you want to speak to Ian or Vichy, for example, our 2 admissions interns, they would be happy to sit down and walk you through kind of their schedules, what they found helpful, what their elective journey was looked like. And they know actually quite a few students in their cohort, what courses they've taken. And then I'm also happy to data mine if you were interested in hearing a little bit more about which were the most popular electives. Although I have to say, Columbia year, we are evolving. Meaning, if when I started this job 2 years ago, and you said how many climate school electives were there, I think there were 3 in the fall of 22 that we had hosted. This year, we have around 15, for example. We just launched a food system elective. Dr. Jessica Fanzo's teaching, huge, they had 32 students register for it with Dr. Ruth DeFries, really popular. So the elective journey and the evolution of the program, it's not a cookie cut like, oh, well, these are the 4 electives that you should all be taking. We're just too dynamic a space for that. Does anybody want to add anything? Or even Sheila, Sheila's courses are all, these were not options last year, so.
Right. Yeah, the law and policy and the climate justice course.
Yes.
That's right. Are now electives.
Yeah.
I want to add something just quickly to the research questions. We do have those, and Alfred, you'd be the person to answer how many of those that we haven't. We have folks work across the university with research PIs, and just as a sort of measure of what happens with that, it's true that every year, not only do people do those graduate research assistantships, but because of the funding that Jeff was mentioning, some of them stay on for several years afterwards, working as research assistants on projects that continue. And another thing that happens in our program, it's not a huge portion of the students that come through, but we always have students who go on and do PhDs, who get excited about the research that they're doing, and then go on and do a PhD very successfully in the areas that they've gotten excited about.
Absolutely. And I can speak, the departmental research assistantships are very much a resource within our program. They're going to be announced in August. Departmental research assistantship available. You can then apply to those, and you'll learn of whether or not you receive a departmental research assistantship by typically, the first weeks in September, and you would actually begin the DRA position, as we like to call them, sometime in October. And it's a it's a fall spring opportunity. And it is $6,000 in compensation for the full opportunity. I do want to say that we had around 30 opportunities last year. So there's always going to be more students interested in departmental research assistantships than we have. But what's very important, is opportunities come along all the time. So I always like to use an example. Emily Weaver is one of our recent alums. She graduated last year, and she didn't get a departmental research assistantship, but interestingly, she sent out some cold emails and ultimately ended up working full-time at Mailman School of Public Health. So it doesn't, just because the departmental research assistantship, there may not be enough opportunities. For example, there are many opportunities across Columbia University. Every single week, you're going to get a weekly newsletter with different research opportunities, teaching assistantship. So, Columbia University is a blueprint of research institutions. There's only going to be opportunities available here.
Yeah, piggybacking on that too, I would say too, so I mentioned we have about a dozen students coming through. More of them come to us directly than we do through so to very crassly sort of categorize, they're the ones we pay for and there's the ones that Alfred pays for, or that come from or is partially paid for. And so, but to that point, we sort of have them throughout the semester. A project comes on, we have this, oh man, we got to recruit, or some students come and they say, hey, we're interested in this. Do you have any opportunities? Well, we're waiting to hear on this award. Maybe we have something. And I'd say probably 3/4 of the students we bring on are through that sort of direct engagement. And then when the calls for DRA placement and things too, we also work with Alfred and the team at the Climate School for placement for that too. So I just really want to emphasize that. And it sort of goes back to that, how do you make the most out of the year? Is advocating for yourself, reaching out to professors, and and you can reach out to me anytime. I may say I don't have anything right now, but come to me in a month. It could be totally different, and we could really be scrambling and need some help. And we've had students who have stayed on multiple semesters and even been hired full time. The other thing, just going back to the electives question, I know you'll have it in the materials. I realize I haven't said much yet, but the areas of specialization, and so the disaster area of specialization is actually sort of set up with the courses, and you don't have to be in the specialization to take the course, assuming that there's room and everything, which there, but that being said, we've tried to sort of set up at least the disaster side, but I know as you guys have looked at the whole curriculum, to also make sure that they're sort of set up in a logical way that folks could jump in and one could lead into the other, or if somebody decides they want to take this and more a la carte. So, but the specializations, I think, provide a good roadmap if that's a topic area that you're interested in, to sort of follow and follow along those electives, and that then sort of accumulate into those specializations.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it. And I'll just plug on the specialization front. Jeff actually co-hosted a specialization info session, and he did a deep dive into all the specialization, courses available. That session is actually embedded on our website under the specialization. So anybody here that's like now all of a sudden peaked and, oh, I didn't, I thought about disaster risk management. Now that I see Jeff, I'd like to learn a little bit more. Now that I heard about his work, definitely check out that embedded video on our website in the specialization section, and reach out to admissions if you need it to be redirected there. I'm just going to answer one more, and I'm mindful of our time of our faculty, and I so thank you guys for participating today and sharing all the resources and your wisdom, first and foremost. So final question was just Caroline. I was wondering quickly, what's the usual class size? Do we take 4 courses as a cohort or 30 or so? That's such a good question. So Caroline, this year, we're anticipating around 120 students to join the learning community. And so therefore, our core courses, as was the case for this current learning community, is split up into 2 sections. So for example, the dynamics class would have a section A or B. Jason's quantitative methods course would have a section A or B, for example. But the electives can be actually quite intimate in scale. And so, it just depends on the course, but some electives I mentioned, 30 students in the food system course. Then we have quite a few electives where, hey, there's 15 students in the class. Does anybody want to add the
No, it's fine. It's formatted.
Is it? Oh, forgive
the whole
me.
cohort
Okay.
takes the class. And actually, some of the things that we hear is that students like the mix. They, there's the smaller sections in some of our core classes, but they like to be collectively as a whole class in others. But the way that I manage the size is I give a lecture once a week to the whole class, and then we have these lab sections where they break out and they do more detailed work in smaller lab sections. So it varies across the formatting, but generally there's lots of different ways that we try to break up the cohort to provide more student to professor connections. But in some cases, we divide things up differently across the different courses.
This is a single class too. So it's a mix. Some of the classes is one cohort, and then some of the classes are split. Like mitigation, Melissa's class I know was a 2-section, or Lisa Dale's for adaptation. But yes.
Although the last thing I would add is it's a moving target. As we grow, we're going to have to think about the class sizes and how we want to make it work moving forward. So cohort models have been proposed, but I think that next year, based on our projected size, it will be similar to what we've done this year.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Well, I just want to say a huge thank you, Jeff, Sheila, Jason. Thank you so much for your time. Any outstanding questions, please email the admissions inbox, and look out for additional emails. We have some more really phenomenal admitted student events coming up. I really hope to see you guys on March 29th. If you haven't registered for the on-campus session, I promise you we're a ton of fun on that shuttle ride up to Lamont. And again, thank you to our faculty for joining.
Thanks, everyone. You should come.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care. Bye, guys.